So, Sister Celeste, I'm going to turn it over to you for your presentation. And again, thank you so much for coming this evening.
Thank you for having me. I
I'm sorry.
You know Sisters of St. Joseph, right?
It's supposed to be.
So it's great.
It's great. Thank you so much for your welcome. And thank you so much that your hearts are moved enough to show up. You know, and when I'm talking about your hearts being moved by the plight of the Ukrainians. So, you know, all of us have been watching television, you know, and seeing these stories and seeing the pictures. And, you know, when we see mothers and their children, which is most of the 80% of the refugees are children. Red-eyed from lack of sleep on a train that departed Ukraine just last night, I think we recognize something of ourselves, our own story and our spirit. And I'm hoping I do this right. Yay! Yay! So it is not enough, though, to live through our experience. We must make meaning of it by transforming our own suffering into empathy for others. We touch into our own story. And when we enter the depth of our hearts, where there are no strangers and we are one, prayer is not enough at times, and we are moved to act. And so I have this prayer. I don't know if you can see it well enough, but it's a prayer that I found on the internet. It's a Quaker prayer. I was surprised that there were words, but they were. Okay. But they were there, okay? So we pray. I should hold a moment of silence. God of all peoples and nations, who created all things alive and breathing, united and whole, show us the way of peace that is your overwhelming presence. We hold before you the peoples of Ukraine and Russia, every child and every adult. We long for the time when weapons of war are beaten into plowshares, when nations no longer lift up swords against nation. God of all peoples and nations. It didn't switch. There we go. We cry out to you for peace. Protect those who only desire and deserve to live in security and safety. Comfort those who fear for their lives and the lives of their loved ones. Be with those who are bereaved. Change the hearts of those set on violence and aggression, and fill leaders with the wisdom that leads to peace. Kindle again in us a love of our neighbor and a passion for justice to prevail, and a renewed recognition that we all play a part in peace. Creator of all, hear our prayer and bring us peace. Make us whole. Amen. Amen. Oh, here we go. If I get this is the national anthem of Ukraine. And I don't know if any of you have seen it. It's been on YouTube. But we have seen so many pictures of Ukraine totally decimated that this song not only captures the spirit and the hopes of the people, but it shows you the Ukraine that was before the war.
Ні слава, ні воля, ще нам, браття українці, усміхнеться доля, згинуть наші вороженьки, як роса на сонці. Запах
So I find that song very moving, having met the Ukrainians, because the pride and love they have for their land is tremendous. I've never met that before. I don't think it exists in our country to that extent, because that's all they talk about, going back to their land, no matter what it is, no matter how destroyed it is. They want to go back because it's their land. And I think that pride in their heritage comes through, and the strength of the people and the resiliency. So how did I end up in Poland? Okay, well, first of all, I was born in Poland, left there when I was 5 years old. And so I understand Polish fluently and I speak it. So I'm also an artist. So this is one of my paintings that I did right here. Because like you, I didn't know what to do with all my feelings, my emotions and sadness and helplessness that I was feeling, because as I watched the television, they looked like my relatives. They looked like my grandmother, my grandfather. And so my heart was like just being torn apart by what was happening there. I had grown up my first 5 years, and I still remember the Russians being in Poland. We were under communism and the fear of that. And so I could relate to all of that. So here I painted this picture on Sunday, and on Monday morning I'm sitting in my chair in my room and I'm praying and looking at my painting and saying, like, God, when are you going to do something? And all of a sudden I heard, but you can go. All right? You can go. And we have this maxim: listen deeply to subtle nudges of the Holy Spirit, then act on them. Okay? And I thought afterwards, in reflection, I thought, my gosh, we have so many good intentions, right? But that one was so strong when I was like, you can go. And I just said, okay, I can go. I was on a semester break between teaching. So I had about 2.5 weeks. And we had a fund in the congregation that allowed you to go to the border in Texas. And I had gone there. And Sister Eileen, who's your cousin, she's the one who kind of oversees that. And so I wrote Sister Eileen and I said, I know we have this fund for Texas. Do you think you'd consider another border? It's just a little farther. So she wrote me back right away and said, yeah, I'll take it to the leadership. And I kept saying, now, Eileen, I only have 2.5 weeks. Okay, so because I've said this to my congregation, they move very slowly. Okay, so Eileen said, don't worry about it. So she called me back the next day, which is already amazing. I knew God was in it because it doesn't happen. And she said, yes, not only can you go, but we're grateful that you're going. All right. So now I had the problem, okay, because, all right, I had permission, which means they were going to fund me, but I didn't know where to go. So I'd been watching the news as you have, and most of the news stories come out of a small town close to the border. The name of that town is Przemysl in Poland. It's on the southeastern part of the border. And I thought, I want to go to Przemysl. So I wrote Catholic Charities, no response there because they're so darn busy. And I thought, oh, there's this Polish group of nuns in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. All right, they're all in habit, down to the ground, right? So I thought, oh, you know what? Wednesday morning, I'm going to call them and see if they know of anything or have a place somewhere. So I called the nuns. And the provincial superior, who's in charge of all the nuns in the United States from that group, she answered the phone. All right, that's amazing. They never answer the phone, you know. But anyway, she answered the phone, and I told her what I introduced myself, and I said I would like to go. And she says, oh yes. She says, we have a convent, because I said, do you have any convents anywhere that are helping the Ukrainian refugees? And she says, oh, we have a convent, the provincial house in Przemysl. I was like, I couldn't believe it. So she said, I will call the provincial in Poland and ask her if you could come, right? And I go, sister, I only have 2.5 weeks. I kept saying that. She said, I'll get right back to you. 2 hours later, 2 hours later, she calls and she says, yes, they said yes, that you could come. Okay, so that's how I ended up Sunday night. So from Tuesday to Sunday night, I'm on the plane heading to Poland. Okay, and in that very short time, I don't know how the word spread as it did. I know how it spread in the convent, you know, tell a nun, tell the world. No, I'm only kidding. No, actually, we have this kind of way to send out a mass email. But anyway, people started to drop off money at the convent. Okay, and that was really wonderful. The congregation was generous also. They gave a very good donation for me to take to Ukraine. But with that money, it was extremely helpful once I got there. And I was going to tell you this later, but let me tell the story so I don't forget. So when the Ukrainians come, you know, they have no money because the banks were closed. So they come almost penniless. So you can imagine coming with all your children, sometimes elderly, and no money. How are you going to support yourself? So that money that was given to me, I would give, like I'd roll a little package up of $50, all right? And the sister who spoke Ukrainian, when each family was leaving, she'd either give them the $50 or $100, putting 2 packets together. In Poland, that $50 is 200 zloty, okay? That's decent. They could survive for like a week, okay? So that would at least give them, they would always find me, the Ukrainians, because she would tell them, I guess, that the American nun did it, the one with the money, okay? And they would find me and they'd be crying. And this is the cool thing. You know, there's that story of the prophet Elijah, and he finds the widow and he says, bake me something. And she says, I only have a little oil. And he says, don't worry about it. It's going to last, right? Do you know that money lasted until Saturday when I was returning to America? I had enough to give every family all the time. It was great. So it was. That's how I felt. Okay? That's exactly it. Okay, moving on. So here are the little sisters where we stayed. And I know you mentioned wanting to get to the cathedral. There it is. Oh, yeah. Okay, so it's in Little Przemysl. That's how you say it. Look at it, the spelling of that. Przemysl. Przemysl is a very small town, 65,000 people. Okay, very tiny. And I say that because when the Ukrainian refugees come into Przemysl, some of them came with the idea that they would work in Przemysl because they want to stay close to the border. Because their idea is, as soon as they can, they're going home. You know, so I know people were upset that only 100,000 could come to the United States as refugees, but most of them don't want to travel that far. So, you know, it sounds like we're not being as hospitable, but that's why. So here are the sisters. This is all the places they are here in the United States. I'm there at the end of the table next to the seat of honor, next to the priest. It's very clerical for the Catholics who know that. Look at that wonderful feast. It's St. Joseph's Day. And the sisters had a special feast for me because that's a big day for us, Sisters of St. Joseph. Look at all that on the table. That's breakfast. Just want you to know that. I got used to eating kibasi for breakfast. So here's a map of Ukraine and Poland. And you can see the red star is Przemysl. All right, that's about 15 kilometers out of the border. It's where the train from the Ukraine comes in. You know that train that you heard about getting bombed? That's the same train that is coming to Poland. And then I will also show you Medyka, the blue star. Medyka is even a smaller town, and it's right on the border itself. Okay, and I did go to visit that. But most of the ministry that I did was in Przemysl. So these statistics, the enormity of this migration out of the Ukraine this exodus, this forced exodus of the people happened so fast. So here it is, March 2nd, there's only 500,000 refugees on March 2nd in Poland. When I left on March 26th, that statistic is March 25th, when I left there were over 2 million. That's only a few weeks, okay? So you can imagine how overwhelming that situation is. So here,
I'm sorry, can I ask?
Sure.
Is that okay? I see that almost 50,000 went to Russia. So what's going on there?
well, because the Ukrainians, many of them were Russian.
Okay, so they're
Right. That's why the amazing part about the whole thing to me was that they didn't know Russia was going to attack. You know, like the United States kept saying, they're outside, they're doing this. Now, to understand that, Russia always had tactics that were like threatening. You know, so, you know, they weren't paying attention as much, or they're thinking that they were just doing some exercises. But most of the reason why they were so shocked is because there were so many Russians. Their family members were in Russia, and they were related. You know, so it was a culture that's really integrated. And so why would they attack their own? That was what they were thinking. So, you know, that was really surprising to me because, you know, I was thinking, you know, I'm what my friends always say, if we ever have an emergency, they're going to find me because I'll be packed and ready to go, you know. So the fact that they didn't think ahead to take out money and all of that, but they didn't believe it. So here we are, everybody's coming off the train. The trains were, come on in, find a seat. Yeah, here, right? Come on in, yeah. So the trains, when they would arrive from the Ukraine, they were packed. They were standing room only. And the train trip, most of the refugees that were coming to the convent and the train station that I met, they were all from the Kyiv area, Bucha, Sumy, all those towns that we're hearing about. All right, those are the refugees that we received. We only had one family from Mariupol because Mariupol's pretty far southeast. We did have some from Odessa. And now they're really getting more from Odessa because Odessa is being attacked at this point. So people were packed in the train. And I have to say that I could not help but have these pictures flash in my mind of the Nazis and the Jews. Even though the trains were modern, it was that whole feeling of these people just pouring out. You could see them, you know, stacked kind of in the train. And they were so tight sometimes that they didn't always get to the bathroom. You know, and in order for them to get to a train, in many times they were going through a barrage of bullets. You know, so I kept saying to them, like, how did you make that decision to go? Like you either stay or you go. Almost all the time it was because of the children. It was the love of their children, that their children would survive. But many times they were leaving their husbands, they were leaving their parents, their grandparents behind. You know, I was thinking when we had the news about Bucha and the massacres there, that I thought that was probably some of the relatives of the refugees I met. You know, terrible, absolutely. So you see that, and you notice right away there's a pet, okay? Because that was also, do they bring their pets? That was really another part of their decision. So here you see some of the refugees as they look. When they arrived, they looked exhausted and traumatized, okay? They didn't know where they were going. I can't even imagine that we would go to another country with plastic bags. I'm trying to move it, there it goes. With a plastic bag of belongings, all right? and not know where our next step was going to be. And you had no money. A number of them were not only exhausted and traumatized, but they were so tired of hearing the noise of the air raid sirens overhead, being stuck in the basement for 3-4 weeks at a time. And they said, one family I met, they said, we had to get out. We couldn't take it anymore. We couldn't stay there anymore. So that's why they then would rush out into the street, trying to get on the train. They had to wait sometimes. Some of them would get into, some of them had cars. They would get as far as they could in a car, but then they'd run out of gas. They'd try to get on buses. People would pick people up if they had room. They were, packed tightly in cars. And here they are. So they're waiting at the train station. I thought it was interesting that I could always tell the socioeconomic level of the refugees by their belongings. By their belongings, you would know them, because they would have suitcases. Most of them would have plastic bags. They were the poorer. Okay, and you could see that. Oops, sorry, hold on. Let me see if I can get that back. So when they arrived at the train station in Przemysl, Poland, they would have all these signs for them, because they could stay in Przemysl, but there were not a whole lot of accommodations there. I said 65,000, small, beautiful little village, all right? And so all transportation, buses and trains, were free in Poland to the Ukrainians. So they encouraged them to go somewhere. Also, when we met the Ukrainians, their first question was not, where can I stay? Their first question was, where can I get work? Okay, where can I get work? And this is a sad thing about Poland. Poland's a beautiful country. They don't have much work. My own niece and nephew, I still have a brother and sister in Poland. My niece and nephew are in England working because they couldn't work in Poland. They had no jobs. So it was hard, because even that they came traumatized and all, and sad and fearful, they also had found out they had disappointment, because they came expectant that they would be given work, and there wasn't. So then they had to look at other countries to go. And so the Polish people were phenomenal in helping them once they arrived in the train station. They've met every need. They would have wheelchairs, baby carriages, World Central Kitchen was there, all of that, to meet their needs. A medical station with pharmacy, because they wouldn't have medicines. Okay, so the people really welcomed them. And there were people from all over the world. I'll show you some of the volunteers. So as soon as the people got off the train, these volunteers with the yellow jackets, they're Catholic Charities. Catholic Charities ran all the stations in Przemysl. And so volunteers would meet them, help them to carry whatever, because they come exhausted. So we'd take their plastic bags and walk them up to the central part of the station. All right. And this was kind of cool. There were volunteers from all over the world, and they wore little name tags, and it would say in French, I speak French, in Russian, I speak Russian. Okay. I speak this, I speak that, right? I thought, I wonder why. I thought all Ukrainians spoke Polish, right? Because they're no. Okay. The younger Ukrainians learn English. Okay, and I didn't know that. I thought I was going to be able to talk with them in any way, but I did end up communicating with them somewhat, because it's like, I speak some English, just like we would say, ja mówię troszkę po polsku. So the church was very present there. Obviously Poland's a Catholic country, and so the Catholic Church was very present, but so were Episcopalians. I didn't meet any Quakers, but I'm sure they were there, okay? You can see some of the nuns. They're not the nuns I stayed with, but they're sisters. This is a couple I met from Germany, but they're Americans, military family. And so the mother brought her son, he's a high school student, to learn how to serve, and that it's important to work for justice. Here I am with Scotland on my right and Wales on my left, okay? I thought this was great. Now, I'm going to tell you a little funny story. When I went to the border, which is coming up, one of the sisters took me, and as we were coming back from the actual border, there's all these people with food and stuff and drinks, and one of them started handing me food and drink. And the sister started laughing. She said, "They think you're Ukrainian refugee." Well, looking at that picture, you can see why, right? So when I got there were so many volunteers. I thought, what can I do? What can I do? All right, because everything was being taken care of and all these people were there. And I thought, I'm an artist. So there was a playroom there, and it was the spirit again that inspired me. I saw crayons at the one table. So I grabbed the sister who speaks Ukrainian and I said, "Can you ask this child, that little boy on the left, can you ask him if I could draw his portrait?" Okay, so I drew portraits. I think I'm going to put a shingle up at the boardwalk in Ocean City. So, 15-minute portrait, okay? I teach drawing, by the way. So, anyway, I drew him, and it was wonderful. First of all, I felt like I was bringing my gifts. All right, so that was one. The other thing is, for those 15 minutes, that child forgot where he or she was. And people, their parents, mothers really, would gather around and watch me do it. So it took them out of the war. And this is a funny, he became my agent on my left. So he started to line up all the kids for me to draw. And this is his little brother. And boy, was he tough on this little kid. He kept telling him to sit still and not move. And what I learned to do is to draw their eyes first. Because, not just because they're the windows to the soul, as the expression says, but because they would start looking down at my drawing and I couldn't get their eyes. So I learned, do the eyes first. And what was really special for me, very, very rewarding, is that as the pictures started to look like them, they started to smile. Okay, so it was again a beautiful moment. This young lady on the left, her mother said to me, "Sign the picture." She spoke English. She said, "Can you please sign the picture? I want my daughter to have a happy memory of this time." So then I began to sign the portrait. This was one of the volunteers. They got into the act also, okay? And so did the nuns. So, good job, right? I caught them, right? So now I'm taking you to the border at Medica to show you what was there. It was a slightly different experience. So you can see on the left, those are medical tents. And you see all the buses lined up. As the refugees come into that border spot, they're put on buses. They're asked to go on buses. And the buses will take them to either the train station or they take them to the humanitarian center that the Polish government set up. It I think, housed about 800 people at one time. Okay? And so that was what happened at Medica. Hi. So as you walked through this large groups of people, these are all volunteers from all over the world. So here we are at Medica. It's right on the border. It's a small little town. And Medica and Przemysl are the busiest cities in Poland, towns in Poland, to receive Ukrainian refugees because it's the most direct route to Kyiv, which is where most of them were coming at that point. And so as you walk in, it was like a flea market, I'm going to say, except everything was free. Okay, so you're walking through, there's all these organizations in all of those booths, cooking food, snacks, soda, whatever you needed. As you walked along, there were boxes filled with clothes, coats, because they only brought little plastic bags, most of them, and that didn't carry much. And it was funny, I helped to carry some of those bags. They had soda, not soda, but like bottles of something in there, because they were heavy, but not clothes, you know? So just to show you the international flavor and the interfaith flavor of the place, here are the Ebenezer organization, and that's Sister Eva. The Sikhs were there. That's how broad it was, okay? I even met Jesuits there. Jesuit priests, no. They're all over. This family was there volunteering. The blonde is the wife of our American ambassador to Finland. And he was there, but I didn't meet him. It was their children. And again, they brought them there so that they would have an experience of what it means to be a refugee. Yes?
The gentleman in the back has on the same kind of bib or vest with the
World Central Kitchen.
Okay, I saw that in an earlier.
Yes, and World Central Kitchen is phenomenal. Okay, they were both at the border and they were in Przemysl, cooking food the entire time, preparing takeout containers so that when the refugees, they could eat right there, or they were given bags of food to take with them. So I can't say enough about that group. The press was there, both in Przemysl. So as you walk closer to the border, this is the actual border, all right? And they wouldn't let me through. I wanted to go over there and say I stepped into Ukraine. No go. And you can see that they had wheelchairs there, so as soon as somebody was walking in, they would, the soldiers, those are soldiers, were the only ones allowed on the other side, and they would go pick them up. And people on this side of the border, there are all these people standing there, and you stand there and just wait at that border, because they never know when their loved one's coming in. I was standing next to a man in probably about his early 40s, and I said, "Who are you waiting for?" He spoke English. He said, "My sister, she's coming in." And I said, "Oh, do you know when she's coming in?" He goes, "No, I'll just be." I said, "How long have you been waiting here?" He said, 8 hours. 8 hours. And the phenomenal thing about all those people who are cooking the food, that's for the police, the volunteers, and the people who are waiting. They're all fed. And I have to say, it showed me again that when our hearts are moved with compassion, there's a unity in all the people. It didn't matter. We heard all these languages, but we were all there about the same thing, all right? Because we were just moved to action by the plight of the Ukrainians. So here's a picture of them. You'll notice, you know, the plastic bags that they're carrying, the small bags, some other bags. So who did I see as coming over? So definitely mothers and children were the predominant group. Now, what we didn't hear in the States, but was true, is that fathers who had 3 or more children in a family were allowed to leave the Ukraine. Even if they were in the military fighting age group, they were allowed to leave because of their children. And if they had a special needs child, they could leave. However, most of the family groups that were displaced they traveled as single families or with other children, family, or friends. So here's the whole group. They're not all her kids. They're children that were given to her by either other family members or friends. And she was bringing them to Poland with her. All right, think about the responsibility of that. All right, and they were going to be placed either with family, friends. This woman said to me that when she landed in Shemesh, it was the first kind word she heard in 4 weeks when she was welcomed. And she was smiling. She was beautiful. Children were also brought because they were going to be placed in family members. They were usually accompanied by someone. But some children were coming alone. And if a child came alone at the border, like through that route, they were taken to an orphanage. Okay, and at first when I heard that, I was like shocked, right? But it was for their safety. It was for their safety. And then their parents would be able to find them. We'd know where they were. They wouldn't disappear. Beautiful, beautiful children. I just have some of the faces that I saw. And this was at the train station. So the children were sad. They were afraid. Someone asked me if they minded me taking their picture. And I said no. Actually, they were happy that I took their picture because it was very important to them. I could not get rid of that music. I think they wanted me to have it. It was very important to them that people would know their story, their plight. And that was very different. I had gone down to Texas and we could not take any pictures. And we were asked not to ask anyone their story in Texas. All right. Here, after we met and they asked us where we can work, and we said, do you have to spend the night? Would you like to come to the convent? They would start to pour out their hearts with the stories because they were so traumatized. They would just tell us everything, everything. Details, sometimes it would be like TMI, too much information, because there were things that we probably shouldn't have heard, but we did. And I love this, but take heart, I have overcome the world, so do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed. Fear was prevalent. It was all over, including among the sisters that I was staying with. And I'm always a person who believes in the good of everyone. But when I went to Poland, I faced such effects of evil, all right, that it was the first time that I actually had such an enormous experience of evil, the effects of evil, not evil within the people. I still prayed for the Russian soldiers, all right, but I kept praying that the goodness that I knew was within them would come forth. Okay, so even the sisters were afraid. They were afraid of Russia bombing. Putin, if I heard, at one point I said, if I hear that man's name one more time, and I kept calling him he who should not be named. Okay, right, because the fear just generated more fear. It was like a cycle. So the mothers and children, the children grabbed your heart. How could those beautiful, vulnerable children? But I have to tell you, the thing that broke my heart were the elderly. So there were some elders, look at that beautiful face that I met. The elderly would arrive and they were not only devastated, but scared to no end because they were coming out of these little towns. They've never left their town their entire life. And now they're coming on a train. They don't know where they're going. They were terrified. I'm going to paint this picture. I haven't done it yet because the memory of it is seared in my mind, which is these two old women, and they're walking in the underground passage in the train and they're clinging to each other and they're sobbing and sobbing and they never stopped crying. I hope they found a good place to welcome them. But I couldn't even take their picture because to me it was such an intimate, vulnerable moment that I couldn't do that. I will paint it though at some point. So again, exhausted from the trip. So this older man is being helped. He couldn't even make up the steps get up the steps. He got up the steps and started to collapse. And this is Pope Francis. Refugees are not pawns on the chessboard of humanity. They are children, women, and men who leave or who are forced to leave their homes. And I kept asking to myself, what was the difference between the Texas border and this border experience? And one of the things was not only the enormity of the picture, it keeps coming back, the enormity of this crisis, but also,
Sister, would you like some water?
thank you,
Water or soda?
just water, thank you. Not only the enormity of the crisis, but they were forced. They had no choice. They did not want to leave. And it was a choice that was made very quickly. You know, so another group we met are adults with physical handicaps. Now imagine them traveling 3 days in a packed train. Thank you, Ann. Great. So again, there were places set up to help, but I met a young woman who was paranoid schizophrenic.
Wrong place.
And, you know, traveling by herself, very pretty, attractive woman. I tried for 2 days to get her help. She was hanging around in the center of the station. I don't know if she refused help, but the second day when I brought another person over who could help her, she denied saying it. Because she didn't, I don't know quite where she was, but I lost track of her after that. I just hope, again, herself, she found a place. So here are pets, and there were all these little food set out for the pets. And some people had to leave their pets home because they were traveling with a large group. Unaccompanied child refugees are among the most vulnerable people in our world. If anyone deserves our compassion, they do. The human trafficking issue was a major concern. Police that we spoke to, the Catholic Charities folks, the sisters, we were all very concerned about human trafficking. And that's why when the sisters, and I'll show you what we did when we would go to the station. Here's Sister Christina, she speaks Ukrainian. We would go to the station, we would try to find mothers and children who needed a place to stay. So some refugees would arrive and they'd have a place to go. All right, so that was fine. But then the train system got overwhelmed. And so then if they wanted to go to Germany, it was a 3-day wait for a ticket. And so we would ask, well, she would ask, do you have a place to go or to stay for a few days? And if they didn't, she would offer them a room. There were 10 rooms in this provincial house. There were 16 sisters there, 10 rooms.
How do they handle special needs children and mentally handicapped or physically handicapped students?
Well, there were I would say only a few that I saw in the 2 weeks that I was there. But there was a whole medical section with nurses and I would imagine social worker. They had therapists there. Okay, so I would imagine they would try to help them in those ways. I didn't see that many, to be honest, and I think we spoke to one family and they had a place. There were usually the handicapped or special needs children would be accompanied by adults and families so that they would deal with that issue. So what we would do is we would go to the train station in the afternoon. So in the morning I would walk there and I'd draw the portraits in the morning. In the afternoon I'd rest up a little, and late afternoon we would start going to the train station because we never knew when the train would come in from the Ukraine. All right, because they'd be traveling 2 or 3 days to get to the border, and then the Polish soldiers would stop them. And every person on the train, they had to check their papers. They were so afraid of Russian infiltration. And so they were verifying that they were Ukrainians because all Ukrainians were given visa and work papers that they could do that in Poland. All right. And so they could stay for as long as they wanted to. a lot of them would choose to go to other countries because they heard there was work there. Okay, so we would find a family, and then my big job was the next one, which is I would take that family to the street outside the train station, and one of the sisters, usually one of the young ones, because they're the only ones who knew how to drive a stick shift. Well, actually, they were the only ones who drove. Okay, the older sisters didn't. Older means in their 50s. Okay, just so you know. All right, so I would bring them down to the street, and one of the sisters would drive a car, and we would put them in the car. One night, when I was there waiting with this mother and children, this huge van pulls up and parks on the street. Now, cars in Poland most of them are like Russian made. They're like little tin boxes, okay? This was a state-of-the-art van, all right? Like that we would see, a very expensive vehicle. So I was like a little suspicious right then and there. And then I noticed that all the windows in the van were blacked out. Another suspicion. Two burly guys got out. I was trying not to judge, but I thought, I wonder what they're about. The police moved right in to talk with them, okay, because it was very suspicious. And then we take them to the convent, and they would be put in they would be offered a bedroom, which might have like 5 beds in it. Well, they call it a bed. I wouldn't say it was a bed as we know a bed. The mattress, it was like a futon opened up. It was about this thick, okay? And the whole family would be in one room, but they were grateful. It didn't have any sirens. It didn't have shooting. Okay, it had a shower. That was the first thing. I have to tell you that I went to bed. I would go into my room around 9:30 in the evening. The sisters would stay up, feed, get them showered, give them pajamas if they needed something to wear. Okay, they wouldn't get to bed till like 11 o'clock at night. They had a lot more energy than I did. And they were up the next morning at 6. They did this 7 days a week. What was a blessing was that they had a lot of young sisters with a lot of energy. This is hopefully a video. Yes, this is a video made by the sisters with a Polish song. And you're going to see the sisters kind of greeting the refugees. So this is the convent. They're a very traditional group. So they still have this sister who's a porter. And she always answers the door. There she is. This is the provincial. They're cooking. This is the refugees making sandwiches for their journey. They have donations of clothes and carriages, everything.
Наша рідна земля, хай буде весна, там, де ми стоїмо до кінця, і нас не зламає війна, наша віра єднає серця, Україна навіки жива. Україна – це наша земля.
Pierogi.
Україна єднає серця.
Laundry every day
Україна – це наша
because you had to make new beds as soon as refugees would leave.
Україна єднає серця.
So one of the hardest things in this whole thing, in the experience, in addition to all those stories, is watching people return to the Ukraine. So there would be a line of people who were returning, and some of them returned because they heard their parents were ill. They were always on the phone, on the cell phone. They would hear that their parents were ill, or they missed their husbands, and they would bring their children back, and we would just look at them, because that was when Kyiv was still being attacked and they were killed. But I don't know what I would do if I had been in that situation and had to make that kind of choice. Today, because I talked to the sisters using WhatsApp, and the Ukrainians are returning even more so now that Kyiv, that area, has been reclaimed by the Ukraine. And I said, why are they returning? Because you don't know what Russia's going to do in this. And they said, well, some of them are returning for a while. They left their children wherever they were, and they're just returning to see what's left of their homes. Or they're returning because they heard somebody was ill, or they're returning to a war effort, and they were returning because their employers were calling them back. And they didn't want to lose their jobs. Okay? And some of them were in rent control apartments for the government, and if you're out of your apartment for so long, you lose it. So for those who still had those apartments, they were returning for those reasons. So I say that because I don't know which is worse. I don't know, So another painting that I did while I was there, I have to say that every evening, I would wonder if my heart could be stretched anymore to hold another story and see one more terror-stricken face. And my big fear was that I would become numb, or just, they were the same story. We heard the same story. Different people, different villages, they were the same story over and over. And I thought, I don't want that to happen to me. The other thing, I was like, God, where the heck are you in all this? Why aren't you doing something? Okay? And so all of that kept coming up for me as I was, in this situation, but in the midst of packed railroad cars, limited resources, I found an indestructible faith and hope in the people, in the Ukrainian people themselves. And that renewed my own faith, okay? That they, in the most dire circumstances, they still had hope. They still had faith. They still loved their country. All right? And so all of that really revitalized my own. It was really touching to me. There was a Greek, Russian Orthodox church right in where we were. It was the cathedral. It was a Russian Orthodox and a Franciscan church and the convent, all in the center. I would watch some of our refugees going into the Russian Orthodox Church, and I hoped that they were getting consolation there in their prayers, because it was one story that will stay with me forever. Really was this one young woman was on her cell phone, and she started to scream, absolutely scream. And so the sister who spoke Ukrainian was with me, runs over, we run over, and she's asking, what's wrong? And here she was talking to a neighbor, and the neighbor said her whole family was killed. And she found out, after she stopped wailing, she stopped crying, she stopped talking. She became comatose. And so there was a psychiatric hospital not too far from the convent. So the sisters brought her there so she could get treated, because they didn't know how to help her. She had a baby. So again, I just kept praying for everyone, because we don't know what happened to them after they left us. We don't know what happened to her, But faith, what I ended up doing, as I was praying, I kept remembering, this was one of my, in every age, oh God, you have been our refuge. You have been our help. Remembering how God has been faithful to me And to us as a people, I thought, God's not going to abandon us. God is not abandoning. God is working actively in our midst. I have to look for that. And so that's what I began to look to see. Where was God? God was working. I have to tell you that the forgiveness and compassion extended by the Polish people just blew my mind, because, you know, when I showed you the map and you saw Lviv over on the right in Ukraine, Lviv was a Polish town before World War II. It was given to Russia after World War II, and they moved all the Polish people out of that area and relocated them. That wasn't easy. The Ukrainians killed a lot of the people, and the Poles killed some of the Ukrainians in return. So there's a hard history of animosity between those people. And to see the welcome, and I kept thinking, how does that happen except through God? All right, through grace of the Spirit, because it happened so quickly. President Andrzej Duda, a year ago, was building a wall to keep out the refugees and the Ukrainians. A year later, he's giving them all visas and work papers. How does that happen? All right. I also think that if you touch in, it's what I began with, if you touch in with your own experience, that empathy and compassion comes forth. And it was out of that, because they knew what that felt like, that they could then forgive and reach out to the Ukrainians. I prayed. There's this prayer in the Catholic Church when I was in Atlantic City. Whoops. It was St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in times of battle. I hated that prayer. They said it after every Mass. In Poland, they said the prayer after every Mass in church. And St. Michael the Archangel is one of the patron saints of the Ukraine. And you know what? I started to like the prayer. I hated battle, but I knew the face of evil. And I wanted the people to be safe. So I painted this painting, that's St. Michael the Archangel, and he's holding them under his wings, safeguarding them. And that was my prayer. And also the community of the sisters. All right, we would share stories, the fears, hopes for the future, and we would do it at the table as we ate. And that helped us. You know, when I was going to Poland, I was not afraid of the Russian attack, that the Russians might attack Poland. That's all the sisters were so afraid. They'd say, oh, you're so brave, you're so brave. I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid of how these nuns in the traditional habit were going to accept this American nun. Okay, that's what I was afraid of. And one funny story was when they picked me up in Rzeszów, I flew into Warsaw, then went to Rzeszów. And so I went right up to them in the airport. You know, they're in full blue habits, right? I go up to them and I say in Polish, hello, I'm Sister Celeste, right? And they go in Polish, oh, Boże, dziękuję. Thank God. We didn't know how we were going to find you in the airport. They were also relieved that I spoke some Polish and that I understood it fluently, because they were told I knew nothing. So anyway, but we would really laugh. But as different as we were, and we were very different, because they were how we lived religious life in the 50s, okay? And so they prayed every 2.5 hours, okay? I'll tell you one funny story. So they knelt all the time, all right? Even the older ones, down on their knees. All their prayers were on their knees. I couldn't get down on my knees, all right? So I'm in chapel, and I like leaned forward a little bit, right? Like I'm kneeling, and they put their hands up like this, and I thought, oh, I could do that, right? I put my hands up like this, and they started the opening prayer, and then they sang a song, and I thought, oh, that's good, anytime now, all right? And then they started the 14 stations of the cross. Okay, by station 11th, I said, oh, Jesus, please get crucified. I don't think I can do this any longer. So but it was, the differences became very small, because we were really there again, carrying out what we believed was the mission of Jesus, to love our neighbor, okay, and to welcome the stranger. And so I grew very close with them, and I really did bond them. And we had lots and lots of laughter, okay? So here's the last night with the donations, I bought pizza for them and for the Ukrainians. Yeah, you thought pierogies were the favorite food in Poland? No, it's pizza, okay? And the other favorite is kebab, okay? All right, kebab, all right? It was really funny. It's like, huh? You know, even in Poland, all right? And at the end, the sisters were asking me, oh, stay with us, right? And I said I couldn't because you kneel too much, you pray too much, and your homilies at Mass are way too long, okay? Now, what I didn't tell them was I didn't even agree with their theology and spirituality. It was really, but I didn't want to start another war, so I just kept quiet about that. But it was great. So there were signs of hope that I looked for, all right? And the children playing outside after being in basements for, 3-4 weeks. And you can see the child is apprehensive. It took a while. It would take a few days for the children not to start crying at noises. Okay? And I lived on the wing in the convent with the Ukrainian refugees, and they wailed. The children wailed all night because they were so used to hearing. They were just waiting for another missile strike, and they were terrified. So, just for them to go out, the sisters had little tricycles, as you can see, smiles returning. At the train station, we didn't get smiles, except for that one woman who said it was her first kind word. Here, people were starting to smile again. Look at this adorable. Children playing, what children do. Sweet. And look at this. How beautiful. And I would look at these newborns and say, they probably will not remember this time. I hope they don't in any way. And so they're a sign of hope. And here are 3 of my friends that they were there for 3 days, so we really became friends, offering signs of peace. And I end with the words from Martin Luther King. I had to change them to become inclusive. I refuse to accept the view that we are so tragically bound to the starless midnight of racism and war that the bright daybreak of peace can never become a reality. I believe that unarmed truth and unconditional love will have the final word. And that's what we pray for. Amen. Amen. I'm not going to pray with you. Okay.
Well, thank you so much.